A millionaire encounters a girl selling flowers at Christmas. What he discovers about her leaves him in tears. Snow fell softly on the streets of London, transforming the city into a Christmas fairy tale scene. Twinkling lights adorned the trees along Oxford Street, and the aroma of roasted chestnuts hung in the crisp December air. Amidst this festive whirlwind, a solitary figure stood out. John Smith, a 62-year-old gentleman with impeccably combed grey hair, walked slowly, his austere features contrasting with the joy around him. His tailored Savile Row suit and handcrafted British shoes spoke of wealth, but his eyes told a different story. As he passed smiling families and loving couples, John felt the weight of his own solitary Christmases. How long had it been since he'd heard the laughter of his children? How many years since he'd shared a festive meal with loved ones? The sparkle in his eyes had long since faded, replaced by a melancholy that not even his billion-dollar fortune could dispel. It was then that something unusual caught his attention. Amidst the bustling sidewalk, a small figure stood out. A girl, no older than 12, stood beside a bucket overflowing with flowers. Her thin, worn coat barely protected her from the biting cold, and her tattered shoes seemed ill-suited for the accumulating snow. Intrigued, John approached. The girl looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Her eyes, a deep, mysterious blue, held a disconcerting mix of hope and resignation. "Flowers bound, sir?" she asked, her voice surprisingly melodious, "to brighten your Christmas." John hesitated. Something about this child touched him deeply, awakening long-forgotten emotions. "What's your name, little one?" he asked softly, his British accent more pronounced due to the emotion. "Lily," she replied, a shy smile playing on her lips. "Like the flowers." John observed the flowers in her bucket, white lilies, red roses, and multicolored carnations, fresh and vibrant, defying the winter chill. "I'll take them all," he said abruptly. Lily's eyes widened in surprise. "All, but sir, there are so many—" "Nonsense," John interrupted gently. "It's Christmas, isn't it? A time for generosity." As John pulled out his wallet, he noticed something curious. Lily's hands, small and delicate, had calluses on her fingers, the kind of calluses he recognized from his younger years playing the piano. "Do you play any instruments, Lily?" he asked casually, handing her several $100 bills. The girl froze for an instant, a shadow passing over her face. I used to play the piano," she murmured, looking away. The answer intrigued John. Why would a child selling flowers in the cold have had piano lessons? And why did she seem so reluctant to talk about it? "And your parents?" he inquired softly. "I live with my aunt," Lily replied quickly, almost defensively. She needs me to help with the bills." John frowned. Something didn't feel right about this story. Lily's posture, her education, the mystery surrounding the piano. It all painted an intriguing and slightly unsettling picture. At that moment, seized by an impulse he couldn't explain, John made a decision. "Lily," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "would you like to have dinner with me tonight? I know a wonderful place nearby, and it seems you could use a warm meal." Lily hesitated, her eyes revealing an internal battle. Fear, distrust, but also hope. I don't know if I should," she whispered. "I understand your hesitation," John replied, his voice reassuring. "But I promise, it's just dinner. Perhaps we can talk about music. I've always wanted someone to share my love for the piano with." At the mention of the piano, Lily's eyes momentarily sparkled before she could hide her reaction. "Cassie, all right," she finally agreed, a hesitant smile illuminating her face, but just for a little while. As they walked together along the snow-covered sidewalk, John couldn't help but notice how Lily nervously glanced over her shoulder every few steps. Who or what was she afraid of? And what secrets did she hide behind those expressive blue eyes? One thing was certain. This Christmas promised to be very different from what John had imagined. As he guided Lily towards the restaurant, he felt, for the first time in years, a spark of something he'd forgotten: hope. What did fate hold in store for this unlikely pair? What mysteries would be revealed about Lily's past? And how would this chance encounter on Christmas Eve change their lives forever? The snow continued to fall softly, covering their footsteps as the city around them pulsed with the magic of the season. For John and Lily, however, the real magic was just beginning. The Ritz, one of London's most exclusive restaurants, wasn't accustomed to such unusual guests. John Smith, a well-known figure in high society circles, entered accompanied by Lily, whose appearance contrasted sharply with the luxurious surroundings. The maitre d', recognizing John, hesitated only for a moment before leading them to a discreet table at the back of the room. Lily gazed around in wonder, her blue eyes reflecting the soft light of the crystal chandeliers. "I've never been anywhere like this," she whispered, sitting down carefully as if afraid of breaking the delicate upholstered chair. John smiled gently. "A first time for everything, my dear." As they perused the menus, John observed Lily closely. Her movements were graceful, almost rehearsed, as if she were accustomed to refined settings, despite her simple clothes suggesting otherwise. "You can order whatever you like, Lily," he said, noticing her hesitation. Lily bit her lip, her eyes scanning the menu with a mixture of fascination and confusion. I don't know what most of these things are," she admitted softly. "Then allow me to suggest," John offered, gesturing to the waiter. As John placed the order in fluent English, Lily's mind wandered. She wondered what her aunt would say if she knew where she was right now. A shiver ran down her spine as she thought of the possible consequences. John noticed her unease. "Is everything all right, Lily? You seem worried." Lily forced a smile. "I'm fine, sir, just not used to all of this." John nodded understandingly. "I understand. You know, I didn't always live like this," he began, his eyes taking on a distant glimmer. "And there was a time when I was just a young musician in Liverpool, dreaming of a career playing the guitar." Lily's eyes widened with genuine interest. "You were a guitarist?" "Yes," John confirmed, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. "I played in small pubs, dreaming of the big stage. It was on one of those nights that I met Mary." His voice faltered for a moment, and Lily noticed a shadow pass over his face. "Who was Mary?" she asked softly. John sighed. "My first love, a talented singer. Together, we imagined conquering the world of rock and roll." "What happened?" Lily inquired, leaning forward, completely absorbed in the story. "Life, my dear." "Life happened," John replied with a touch of bitterness. "My father fell ill and I had to take over the family business. Mary, she followed her dream, went on tour across America. At that moment, the waiter arrived with their dishes. Before Lily, a plate of pan-seared scallops with truffle risotto was placed. Her eyes widened at the impeccable presentation. "It's too beautiful to eat," she murmured. John smiled. "Beauty is meant to be appreciated, my dear, in all its forms." As they ate, John continued his story. He spoke of how he transformed his father's small business into an empire, about his failed marriage and the estrangement from his children. "A success comes at a price, Lily," he said, his eyes reflecting years of regret. "Sometimes we lose sight of what truly matters." Lily listened attentively, chewing thoughtfully. There was something about John's story that resonated deeply with her, although she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "And you, Lily?" John asked softly. "What's your story?" Lily froze, her fork stopping midway to her mouth. For a moment, panic flashed in her eyes. Lily froze, her fork stopping midway to her mouth. For a moment, panic flashed in her eyes. There's not much to tell," she said, avoiding John's gaze. "I've lived with my aunt for as long as I can remember. She does the best she can." John noticed the hesitation in her voice. "And your parents?" "They passed away," Lily replied quickly. Too quickly. "It was a long time ago." John frowned, noting the subtle inconsistencies in her account. "And the piano? You mentioned you used to play." Lily's eyes lit up for a moment before she caught herself. "Oh, yes. I had lessons before what?" John pressed gently. Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Before everything changed, I guess." John realized he was treading on delicate ground. He decided to change tactics. You know, I have a Steinway grand piano in my flat, he mentioned casually. It's been practically untouched for years. Lily's eyes shone with barely contained longing. A Steinway, really? John nodded, noting her reaction. Perhaps one day you could come and play it. Lily opened her mouth to reply, but then something over John's shoulder caught her attention. Her face paled visibly. I need to go, she said abruptly, standing up. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Smith. It was very kind of you. John, taken aback, stood up as well. Lily, wait. What's wrong? But Lily was already moving swiftly towards the exit. John followed, confused and concerned. Outside, the snow was still falling. Lily stopped on the sidewalk, looking frantically from side to side. Lily, please, John implored, reaching her. Tell me what's happening. I can help. Lily turned to him, tears in her eyes. You can't, Mr. Smith. No one can. Before John could respond, a black car screeched to a halt beside them. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman with a stern expression stepped out. Lily! There you are, the woman exclaimed, grabbing the girl's arm. I've been looking all over for you. Lily lowered her head, all the vivacity she had displayed during dinner vanishing instantly. Sorry, Aunt Eleanor, she murmured. The woman glared at John suspiciously. Who are you? What do you want with my niece? John, maintaining his composure, replied calmly. John Smith, madam. I merely offered your niece dinner on this cold night. The woman narrowed her eyes. Well, Mr. Smith, I appreciate your generosity, but Lily needs to come home now. Without waiting for a reply, she practically dragged Lily into the car. The last thing John saw before the door slammed shut were Lily's pleading eyes, filled with fear and something else, something he couldn't decipher. As the car sped away, John stood on the sidewalk, the snow accumulating on his shoulders. His mind raced with questions. Who was Lily, really? What was this mysterious aunt hiding? And why did John feel, deep down, that he needed to uncover the truth? One thing was certain. This wouldn't be the end of his connection with the enigmatic flower girl. It was just the beginning of a mystery that promised to unearth long-buried secrets and change lives forever. One thing was certain. This wouldn't be the end of his connection with the enigmatic flower girl. It was just the beginning of a mystery that promised to unearth long-buried secrets and change lives forever. John Smith's penthouse apartment, with its panoramic view of Hyde Park, was immersed in silence. Sitting in his leather armchair, he contemplated the city through the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of aged scotch untouched in his hand. His mind wandered, replaying the events of the previous night. The image of Lily, her blue eyes filled with mystery and fear, haunted him. There was something about that child, something that had awakened long-dormant feelings within him. With a sigh, John rose and walked over to the Steinway piano in the corner of the room. His fingers brushed the keys softly, evoking memories of a life that seemed to belong to another person. Liverpool, 1975. The aroma of fish and chips and ale filled the air. John, then an 18-year-old, sat at the piano in a small pub on the docks. His fingers danced over the keys, the music of Elton John flowing like the Mersey itself. It was then that he saw her. Mary. Her fiery red hair glowed under the dim pub lights, her microphone clutched in her hand like a precious treasure. Their eyes met, and in that moment, John knew his life would never be the same. The shrill ringing of the telephone ripped John from his reverie. He answered, his voice still thick with emotion. Mr. Smith. The voice on the other end was grave, professional. This is Charles Davies, the private investigator you hired. John straightened, immediately alert. Yes, Mr. Davies. Did you find anything about the girl? I did, sir, but I'm afraid the information is intriguing, to say the least. John felt a knot forming in his stomach. Go on. Well, for starters, there are no official records of a girl named Lily matching the description you provided. No birth certificate, no school records. How is that possible? John murmured, perplexed. There's more, Davies continued. The woman who presented herself as Lily's aunt. Her name is Eleanor Blackwood. She has a colorful history. What kind of history? Well, she's been investigated several times for suspected fraud and, more disturbingly, possible involvement in a child trafficking case a few years ago. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, but John felt the blood run cold in his veins. "Good God," he whispered. "Mr. Smith," Davy's voice was serious. "I advise caution. This situation could be more complex and potentially dangerous than we initially anticipated." After hanging up the phone, John stood motionless, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The mystery surrounding Lily had just deepened considerably, and with it, a sense of urgency and concern grew in his chest. After hanging up the phone, John stood motionless, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The mystery surrounding Lily had just deepened considerably, and with it, a sense of urgency and concern grew in his chest. He walked to the window, gazing at the city below. Somewhere out there, Lily was alone, possibly in danger. The thought was unbearable. His gaze drifted to a framed photograph on the bookshelf, him and his two children, David and Emily, taken years ago when they were still a family. Guilt and regret washed over him like a tidal wave. "I can't fail her like I failed you," he murmured to the photograph. Determined, John picked up the phone again. It was time to make some calls, use his connections. If Lily needed help, he would do everything in his power to provide it. As he dialed Faye, another memory assaulted him. Liverpool, 1980, his father's office, the air heavy with the smell of expensive cigars and unmet expectations. "John," his father said, the disappointment evident in his voice, "the company needs you. Our family built this empire, and now it's your responsibility to maintain it." "But Dad," John protested, "music is my life. Mary and I, we have plans." "Plans?" his father scoffed. "Childish dreams. It's time to grow up, son. Duty comes before desire." That night, heartbroken, John watched Mary leave for her American tour. He stayed behind, tethered to a destiny he hadn't chosen. The sound of someone answering on the other end of the line brought John back to the present. "Hello? Who is this?" The voice was familiar, laden with years of distance and unresolved hurt. "David," John said, his voice trembling. "Son, it's me." There was a long silence on the other end. John could practically feel the tension through the phone. "Dad," David finally replied, his voice cold. "It's been a while. What do you want?" John closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of neglect. "David, I need your help." He could imagine the look of surprise on his son's face. John Smith, the man who always had all the answers, who built an empire with his bare hands, asking for help. "Help," David repeated, incredulous. "With what?" John took a deep breath and began to tell the story of Lily. As he spoke, he felt something shifting within him. For the first time in years, he wasn't the business tycoon, the man who had the world at his feet. He was just a man, imperfect and vulnerable, seeking redemption. "And now, Ma," he concluded, "I fear she may be in real danger. David, I know I have no right to ask, but I'll catch the next flight to London," David interrupted, his voice now filled with a determination that reminded John of his own father. John felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you, son." After hanging up, John returned to the piano. His hands trembled slightly as he positioned his fingers over the keys. Then, for the first time in decades, he began to play. The notes of "Your Song" by Elton John filled the apartment, each chord laden with emotion. It was a prayer, a plea for forgiveness, a promise of redemption. As he played, John made a silent vow. He would find Lily, he would protect her, and in the process, maybe, just maybe, he could mend the mistakes of the past and rebuild the bonds he had neglected for so long. The music flowed, echoing through the London night, carrying with it the hopes and fears of a man in search of redemption. Somewhere in the city, a girl named Lily slept, unaware of the forces moving to change her destiny. The mystery was only beginning to unfold, and John Smith was determined to unravel every layer, no matter the cost. The past and the present were about to collide, and at the center of this storm was a girl with blue eyes and a secret that could change everything. Morning arrived in London with a cold, crisp clarity, John Daxiu, who had barely slept, watched the sunrise from his apartment, a cup of tea untouched and growing cold in his hands. His son, David, would arrive in a few hours, and the anticipation of their reunion filled him with nervous energy. The sound of the intercom pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Smith," the doorman's voice crackled. "There's a young lady here insisting on seeing you. She says her name is Lily." John's heart leaped. "Send her up immediately." Minutes later, Lily entered the apartment, her eyes wide with awe at the luxury surrounding her. She seemed smaller and more fragile than John remembered, as if the weight of her secrets was crushing her. "Lily," John said softly, "I'm so relieved to see you. Are you all right?" Lily nodded hesitantly, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on the magnificent Steinway piano. "Is that the piano you mentioned?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. John smiled. "Yes, it is. Would you like to play it?" Lily's eyes sparkled, but she hesitated. "Actually, I shouldn't be here. My aunt—" "Your aunt doesn't need to know," John reassured her. "Why don't you play a little while we talk?" Lily approached the piano almost reverently, her fingers brushing the keys with a familiarity that didn't go unnoticed by John. Then, to his astonishment, she began to play the notes of Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9. No two filled the apartment. John was stunned. Lily's technique was impressive, far beyond what one would expect from a child her age. But more than that, there was an emotional depth to her playing that left him speechless. When the last note faded, a heavy silence hung in the air. "Lily!" John finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "That was extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" Lily lowered her eyes, her fingers still caressing the keys. I shouldn't have done that. Please don't tell anyone." John knelt beside her, gently lifting her chin so their eyes met. "Lily, you have an incredible gift. Why hide it?" Tears began to well up in the girl's eyes. Because she won't let me play. She says it's dangerous, that someone might recognize me." "Who, Lily? Your aunt?" Lily nodded, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. "Lily," John said softly, "please tell me the truth. Who are you really? And why are you afraid?" For a moment, it seemed as though Lily would open up. Her lips trembled, the words on the verge of escaping. But then, as if a curtain had been drawn, her expression closed off. I can't," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. I shouldn't have come." Before John could react, Lily stood up and ran to the door. He followed, calling her name, but she had already disappeared into the lift. Frustrated and worried, John returned to his apartment. The mystery surrounding Lily had deepened further. Her extraordinary musical talent, her palpable fear, the enigmatic warnings from her aunt. It all pointed to a story far more complex than he had initially imagined. Hours later, the doorbell rang. John opened the door to find David, his son, standing there. The 35-year-old was the image of John in his youth, but his eyes held a hardness that made his father's heart ache. "Dad," David said formally, stepping into the apartment. "David," John replied, resisting the urge to embrace his son. "Thank you for coming." For a few moments they stood there, father and son, separated by years of resentment and unspoken words. Then, as if reaching a silent agreement, they both moved towards the living room. "So," David began, sitting down, "tell me about this girl." John recounted everything he knew about Lily, including that morning's encounter and her surprising piano performance. "And you think she might be in danger?" David asked, his professional tone masking any emotion. "I'm certain of it," John replied. "David, there's something about this whole story and something that doesn't add up. We need to help her." David studied his father for a long moment. "Why? Why is this so important to you?" John hesitated, then answered with an honesty that surprised them both. Because I see in her a chance for redemption. An opportunity to do something right after so many wrongs." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of hurt and regret. "Like Emily?" David finally said, his voice low. John felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Emily, his youngest daughter, whose battle with addiction he had ignored for so long, too focused on his business. "David, No," David interrupted. I don't want to hear apologies. Not now. Let's focus on this girl. Lily, what do you want me to do? Swallowing the lump in his throat, John nodded. We need to find out more about her past, about this so-called aunt, and we need to find a way to keep her safe. David thought for a moment. I have some contacts in the Metropolitan Police. I can make some discreet inquiries. Thank you, son, John said softly. David simply nodded, then stood up. I'll make some calls. In the meantime, try not to do anything reckless, Dad. This situation could be more dangerous than we think. When David left the room, John found himself alone again. He walked over to the piano, touching the keys that Lily had played hours before. The melody of the nocturne still seemed to linger in the air, an echo of the girl's mystery and beauty. As he contemplated the ivory keys, an idea began to form in his mind. If Lily truly was the musical prodigy she appeared to be, perhaps there was a way to use that to help her. With renewed determination, John picked up his phone. It was time to make some calls, use his connections in the world of classical music. If he could arrange an audition for Lily at a prestigious music school, perhaps that could offer her a way out, a chance to escape whatever or whomever she was running from. As he dialed, John glanced at the photo of his family on the bookshelf. David, Emily, his ex-wife, faces from a past he had neglected in his pursuit of success. I won't fail this time, he vowed softly. Not with Lily, not again. The sun began to set over London, casting long shadows across the apartment. Somewhere in the city, a girl with an extraordinary gift and a mysterious past waited, unaware of the forces moving to change her destiny. The symphony of their lives was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The following week was a whirlwind of activity for John. Between meetings with company executives and frantic calls to contacts in the music world, he barely had time to breathe. Yet his thoughts constantly returned to Lily. One sunny afternoon, John was in his penthouse office when his assistant announced an unexpected visitor. Mr. Smith, there's a Mrs. Elizabeth Morgan here to see you. The name made John freeze. Elizabeth Morgan, the renowned director of the Royal Academy of Music, one of the world's most prestigious musical institutions. He hadn't seen her in decades. Send her in, he said, straightening his tie nervously. Elizabeth entered the room with the grace of a queen. At 70, she still possessed the elegant posture of a dancer and the piercing gaze that intimidated even the most seasoned musicians. John, she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. It's been a while. Elizabeth, he replied, kissing her hand. It's a pleasure to see you again. Please sit down. As they settled, Elizabeth got straight to the point. I received your message about a young prodigy. I confess I was intrigued. It's not every day that John Smith, the business magnate, contacts me to talk about music. John smiled sheepishly. Times change, my dear. But music never truly leaves us, does it? Elizabeth studied him for a moment. No, I suppose not. So tell me about this girl. John hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Her name is Lily. She's, well, to be honest, I don't know exactly how old she is, but her talent... Elizabeth, it's extraordinary. He then described Lily's piano performance, the emotion in her playing, the technique that belied her years. Elizabeth listened intently, her face a mask of professional neutrality. When John finished, she remained silent for a long moment. John, she finally said, you know I can't simply accept a student based solely on your word. However influential you may be. I understand, he replied quickly. All I'm asking for is a chance, an audition. Elizabeth sighed. Very well, I'll be in London for another 2 days. Bring the girl to the Royal Albert Hall tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll hear her myself. Relief flooded John. Thank you, Elizabeth. You won't regret it. After Elizabeth left, John immediately reached for the phone to call Lily. It was only then that reality hit him. He had no way to contact her. Frustrated, he turned to the only option he had left. David, he said when his son answered, I need your help finding Lily. It's urgent. Hours later, John and David were in a modest neighborhood in East London, standing in front of a rundown apartment building. Are you sure this is the place? John asked. looking skeptically at the building. David nodded. My contacts confirmed it. Lily and her aunt live in flat 3B. Taking a deep breath, John approached the door and rang the bell. Seconds stretched into an eternity until, finally, the door creaked open. Lily stood there, her blue eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Mr. Smith," she whispered. "So what are you doing here?" "Lily?" John began, but was interrupted by a harsh voice from within the flat. "Lily? Who is it?" Before Lily could answer, Eleanor Blackwood appeared at the door, her gaze hardening at the sight of John. "You!" she hissed. "I told you to stay away from my niece." John straightened, meeting Eleanor's gaze. "Mrs. Blackwood, I've come to offer Lily an extraordinary opportunity, a chance to audition at the Royal Albert Hall tomorrow." Lily's eyes lit up, but Eleanor placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Absolutely not," she declared. "Lily isn't going anywhere." "Please," John implored, looking directly at Lily. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance. With your talent, Lily, you could—" "I said no," Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising. "Now, get out of here before I call the police." John was about to argue when he felt David's hand on his shoulder. "Dad," he murmured, "we can't force them. Let's go." Reluctantly, John turned away, his heart heavy. As they walked back to the car, he couldn't help but notice Lily's expression, a mixture of longing and terror that disturbed him deeply. Back at John's apartment, father and son discussed the day's events. "There's something seriously wrong with this situation," David said, pacing back and forth. "That woman's reaction, it's like she's hiding something." John nodded grimly. "I agree, but what can we do? We can't just kidnap Lily and take her to the audition." David stopped, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Maybe we don't have to." "What do you mean?" "Dad, you said Lily came to your apartment on her own, right? Maybe she'll come again." John considered the idea. It was risky, but it might be their only chance. That night, while the city slept, John sat at the piano. His fingers danced over the keys, playing the same piece Lily had played days before. It was a prayer, a summons, a hope. The next morning, at 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. John opened the door to find Lily, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. Smith," she said, her voice trembling. "Is it true? How about the audition?" John smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Yes, my dear, it's true." Lily hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. Eleanor doesn't know I'm here. She'll be furious." John knelt down to her eye level. "Lily, I know you're scared, but this is an incredible opportunity. Do you trust me?" Lily stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Good," John smiled. "Now, let's get ready. We have an audition to win." As they headed to the piano for a final rehearsal, John couldn't help but feel they were on the verge of something monumental. The mystery surrounding Lily was far from solved, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The symphony of their lives continued, each note leading them closer to the truth and perhaps redemption. The Royal Albert Hall, majestic and imposing, loomed before them like a temple of music. John felt Lily tremble slightly beside him as they climbed the steps to the entrance. "It's all right, my dear," he murmured reassuringly. "You'll do wonderfully." Lily nodded, her blue eyes a mixture of nervousness and determination. Dressed in a simple blue dress that John had hastily purchased that morning, she seemed even smaller and more fragile than usual. In the foyer, they found David, waiting anxiously. "Everything ready?" he asked, his gaze shifting between his father and Lily. John nodded. "Yes, but we need to be vigilant. If Eleanor finds out..." As if summoned by his words, the doors of the Royal Albert Hall burst open. Eleanor Blackwood stormed into the foyer, her eyes blazing with fury. "Lily!" she shrieked. "So I get over here right now?" Lily shrank back behind John, clutching his jacket. "Please," she whispered, "don't let her take me." John positioned himself protectively in front of Lily, while David stepped forward to intercept Eleanor. "Mrs. Blackwood," David said, his voice calm but firm, Please calm down. We're in a public place." "Calm down?" Eleanor spat. "You've kidnapped my niece." "No one has kidnapped anyone," John intervened. "Lily came of her own free will. She has an extraordinary gift, and she deserves this opportunity." Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Opportunity? You have no idea what's at stake here, Smith." Before the situation could escalate further, an authoritative voice cut through the air. "What is going on here?" Everyone turned to see Elizabeth Morgan imposing in her tailored suit. Observing the scene with a raised eyebrow, John seized the opportunity. "Miss Morgan, allow me to introduce Lily, the young pianist I told you about." Elizabeth looked at Lily, who was still partially hidden behind John. Her experienced eyes assessed the girl for a long moment. "Shadida, and I presume this is her guardian?" Elizabeth asked, gesturing elegantly towards Eleanor. "Yes," Eleanor replied curtly, "and we're leaving now." "Just a moment," Elizabeth said, her voice brooking no argument. "Since we're all here, why don't we proceed with the audition? After all, I traveled from Salzburg specifically for this." Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, but Elizabeth silenced her with a look. "My dear," Elizabeth addressed Lily directly, "would you like to play for me today?" Lily looked at John, who nodded encouragingly, then at Eleanor, whose expression was a mixture of fear and resignation. Finally, she turned to Elizabeth. "Yes, ma'am," Lily replied, her voice small but firm. "I would very much like to." Elizabeth smiled. "Excellent. Let's all move to the concert hall, then." As the group followed Elizabeth, John couldn't help but notice the palpable tension between everyone. Eleanor seemed to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown, her eyes constantly darting to the exits as if contemplating an escape. David remained close, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. In the grand concert hall, Lily ascended the stage, looking tiny in front of the imposing Steinway grand piano. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and for a moment remained completely still, her eyes closed as if gathering her focus. Then her fingers touched the keys, and the magic began. The opening notes of Tchaikovsky's piano concerto, No One, filled the air. John felt his breath catch in his throat. Lily's technique was impeccable, but it was the emotion in her playing that truly captivated. There was a depth, a maturity to her performance that belied her age. Beside him, John heard Eleanor stifle a sob. Glancing over, he saw tears streaming down the woman's face, her expression a mixture of pride, fear, and guilt. Elizabeth Morgan sat completely still, her eyes never leaving Lily. Decades of experience hadn't prepared the director of the Royal Academy for this, a child playing with the soul of a master. When the last note faded, a reverent silence fell over the hall. Lily opened her eyes slowly, as if awakening from a dream. Elizabeth was the first to move. She walked onto the stage with purposeful strides and stopped before Lily. "My dear," she said softly, "where did you learn to play like that?" Lily glanced nervously at Eleanor before replying, I've always known, I think. The music is always in my head." Elizabeth turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Blackwood, you have a prodigy on your hands. A child like Lily comes along once in a generation. It would be a crime to deny her the opportunity to develop her gift." Eleanor seemed to be waging an internal battle. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. It's not that simple." "Then explain," John intervened. "Please, Eleanor. What's really going on here?" Eleanor looked at Lily, who was watching her with a mixture of fear and hope. Something seemed to break within her. Eleanor began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not really Lily's aunt." The confession landed like a bombshell in the room. David immediately went on alert, while John moved closer to Lily protectively. "Who are you, then?" John asked, his voice strained. "And who is Lily, really?" Eleanor closed her eyes, as if gathering her courage. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Her real name is Amelia," she said. "Amelia Davies." John felt the world tilt on its axis. "What?" he whispered, incredulous. Eleanor looked directly at John, her voice choked with emotion. "She's your granddaughter, John, Emily's daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily, or Amelia, looked from Eleanor to John, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. John staggered, feeling as though he'd been punched in the stomach. His granddaughter? Emily's daughter? The implications of this revelation were overwhelming. It was David who finally broke the silence. "Dad," he said, his voice strained, "I think we need to continue this conversation somewhere more private." Elizabeth Morgan, sensing the gravity of the situation, intervened with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. "I can offer my suite at the Savoy. It's private, and we're just a short walk from here." John nodded mechanically, still in shock. He looked at Lily, no, Amelia, who seemed small and frightened on the stage of the Royal Albert Hall. "Come, my dear," he said softly, extending his hand to her. After a moment of hesitation, she took it, descending from the stage. The group made the short journey to the hotel in a silence thick with tension. In Elizabeth's spacious suite, they all settled, the atmosphere heavy with unasked questions and truths yet to be revealed. John sat directly across from Eleanor, his eyes never leaving hers. "Explain," he said, his voice low but firm. "Everything." Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "It started about 6 years ago," she began. "Emily, she was in a very dark place. The addiction had taken over her life completely." John closed his eyes, the pain of the memory etched on his face. David placed a comforting hand on his father's shoulder. "I was a social worker at the time," Eleanor continued. "I was assigned to Emily's case when the authorities began to question her ability to care for Amelia." Lily, or Amelia, listened intently, her large blue eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Emily knew she was losing control. She came to me one night, desperate. She said she needed help, that she needed to protect Amelia. She asked me to hide the girl." John leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Why didn't she come to me? I could have helped." Eleanor shook her head sadly. "Emily believed you had abandoned her, that you were too busy with your business to care. She was terrified that you would take Amelia away from her permanently." Guilt hit John like a tidal wave, leaving him breathless. How many times had he ignored Emily's cries for help, convinced she only wanted more money to fuel her addiction? "What happened next?" David asked, his voice tense. I agreed to help," Eleanor admitted. "It wasn't ethical, it wasn't legal. But at the time, it seemed like the only way to keep Amelia safe. Emily gave me forged documents, money, and made me promise to keep Amelia hidden until she recovered and could come back for her." "And Emily?" John asked, dreading the answer. Eleanor lowered her eyes. "She died of an overdose 3 months later. I didn't know how to contact the family, and I was afraid of what would happen to Amelia if the authorities found out." Silence fell over the room again, heavy with the tragedy of the situation. It was Amelia who broke it this time. "So, you're not my aunt?" she asked Eleanor, her voice small and trembling. Eleanor shook her head, tears in her eyes. "No, darling. I'm so sorry for lying to you for so long. I was only trying to protect you." Amelia then turned to John, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "And you're my grandfather." John felt his heart break and rebuild in that moment. "Yes, my dear," he said softly, "I am." Slowly, hesitantly, Amelia approached John. He opened his arms, and she threw herself into them, sobbing. John held her tightly, his own tears finally falling. David watched the scene unfold, his own emotions evident. He was an uncle. He had a niece, a musical prodigy niece, no less. Elizabeth Morgan, who had remained silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke. "This situation is extraordinary. But it doesn't change the fact that Amelia has a rare and precious gift. She needs guidance, proper training." John looked at Elizabeth over Amelia's head. "What do you suggest?" "The Royal Academy would be honored to have her as a student," Elizabeth said. But I understand that, given the circumstances, that might not be feasible immediately." Eleanor spoke up, her voice trembling. I know I've done wrong. I'm prepared to face the consequences. But please, don't punish Amelia for my mistakes." John looked at David, a silent conversation passing between father and son. David nodded slightly. "No one is going to punish anyone," John declared. "What matters now is Amelia's well-being. Eleanor, despite your questionable methods, you cared for her all these years. We can't simply disregard that." He turned to Amelia, still in his arms. "My dear, I know this is a lot to process, but I want you to know that you have a family here. Me, your Uncle David, we want to get to know you, to love you, to support you in whatever you choose to do." Amelia looked at John, then at David, and finally at Eleanor. Can I stay with all of you?" she asked hesitantly. John smiled, tears in his eyes. "We'll find a way, my dear. Together." As the sun began to set over London, casting a golden glow through the windows of the suite, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The air was still thick with emotion, but now there was also a sense of possibility, of hope. "We'll find a way, my dear. Together." As the sun began to set over London, casting a golden glow through the windows of the suite, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The air was still thick with emotion, but now there was also a sense of possibility, of hope. The symphony of their lives had taken an unexpected turn, but the discordant notes were beginning to resolve into a sweeter harmony. The road ahead would be challenging, with many questions still unanswered and wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, John felt they were on the right path. The melody continued, and the next movement promised to be the most beautiful of all. The weeks that followed the revelation at the Royal Albert Hall were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. John Smith, determined to uncover every detail of Amelia's past, threw himself into an intensive investigation. Sitting in his penthouse office, John examined stacks of documents, reports, and old photographs. His tired eyes lingered on one photo in particular: Emily, his deceased daughter, holding a baby in her arms. Amelia. His heart ached at the thought of all the lost years, the memories that were never made. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. David entered, carrying a thick file. "Dad," he said, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. "I think we've found something." John straightened, immediately alert. What is it?" David opened the file, spreading its contents across the desk. "Remember Eleanor mentioned forged documents? Well, we traced their origin. It led us to a small music school in Cornwall." "Cornwall?" John frowned, puzzled. David nodded. "Apparently, before the end, she spent some time there. And you won't believe what we discovered." Meanwhile, downstairs in John's apartment, Amelia sat at the Steinway piano, her fingers dancing over the keys. Elizabeth Morgan, who had extended her stay in London to personally oversee the young prodigy's training, watched attentively. "Magnifique, ma chérie," Elizabeth praised when Amelia finished the piece. "Your interpretation of Chopin is truly extraordinary. It's as if you channeled decades of experience and emotion through your hands." Amelia smiled shyly. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Sometimes, when I play, I feel... I can't explain it. It's like the music takes me to places I don't know, but they feel familiar." Elizabeth studied the girl with a penetrating gaze. "As music has the power to awaken deep memories, even those we didn't know we had. Keep exploring that feeling, Amelia. It may lead you to surprising discoveries." Back in the office, John listened intently as David detailed their findings. The music school in Cornwall is run by a couple, the Harpers, Robert and Victoria Harper. They're respected musicians in the classical music scene, David explained. "And here's the intriguing part. They lost a daughter about 7 years ago, a little girl named Rose." John felt his heart quicken. "You think?" David nodded gravely. "The dates match. And there's more. Victoria Harper is Emily's second cousin. Apparently they were close as children, but lost touch in adulthood." "Good heavens," John murmured, running a hand through his grey hair. "So, Amelia could be their daughter," David finished. "Emily might have given the baby up for adoption to the Harpers, perhaps hoping to give Amelia a better life. But something must have gone wrong." John stood up, walking to the window. Below, he could hear the soft notes of the piano, Amelia practicing diligently. The melody seemed to carry the weight of this revelation. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice low. David joined his father at the window. "We could contact the Harpers, arrange a meeting." "But Dad, this changes everything." If Amelia is really their daughter, we'll lose her, John finished, the pain evident in his voice. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging heavy between them. Finally, John turned to his son. "We need to tell Amelia the truth," he said firmly. "She deserves to know about her past, about her biological family. We can't make the same mistake Eleanor did, hiding the truth from her." David nodded, though the apprehension was clear in his eyes. "What if she wants to leave? What if she wants to stay with the Harpers?" John closed his eyes, the internal struggle evident on his face. Then we'll have to respect her decision, however painful it may be." At that moment, the music downstairs changed. The soft notes from before gave way to a more intense, almost anguished melody. Father and son exchanged a knowing look before descending the stairs. In the music room, they found Amelia completely absorbed in her playing. Her eyes were closed, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as her fingers flew across the keys. The piece she was playing was unlike anything John or David recognized. When the last note faded, Amelia opened her eyes, seeming surprised to see her small audience. "That was incredible," David said softly. "What piece was that?" Amelia blinked, confused. I don't know, it was just in my head, like a memory from a dream." John and David exchanged significant glances. Elizabeth, sensing the tension in the air, discreetly excused herself from the room. "Amelia," John began, sitting beside her on the piano bench, "there's something we need to talk to you about. Something important about your past." The girl looked from John to David, apprehension clear in her eyes. Is it something bad?" David knelt on the other side of the bench. "No, darling, it's not bad. It's just complicated." As John gently began to explain about the Harpers and the possibility that they were her biological parents, Amelia listened silently, her hands resting motionless on the piano keys. The symphony of their lives was about to gain new instruments, new voices. It remained to be seen whether this addition would bring harmony or dissonance to the melody they were just beginning to compose together. Amelia's heart pounded as she approached the door of the music school in Cornwall. On the other side, her potential biological parents awaited, just as nervous as she was. Eleanor, the woman who had raised her, stood beside her, a comforting presence amidst the turmoil of emotions. Amelia took a deep breath and turned the handle. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged couple whose eyes immediately filled with tears upon seeing her. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Amelia studied them, searching for familiar features in their faces. The man had the same green eyes as she did, while the woman shared her hesitant smile. "Rose," the woman whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Our little Rose." Amelia felt a lump form in her throat. They were strangers, yet something within her resonated with their presence. Unsure of how to react, Amelia did the only thing that always calmed her. She walked over to the piano in the corner of the room and sat down. Her fingers touched the keys softly, and a familiar melody filled the air. It was the lullaby Eleanor used to sing to her when she was little. Amelia closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her. To her surprise, a second melody intertwined with hers. Opening her eyes, she saw Robert Harper, her biological father, sitting beside her, his hands dancing over the keys in perfect harmony with her own. The music he played was different, yet it complemented hers in a way Amelia had never experienced before. Silent tears streamed down Victoria Harper's face as she watched the scene unfold. On impulse, she began to hum softly, her voice blending with the piano melodies. It was a tune Amelia had never heard before, yet it somehow felt familiar, as if etched into her DNA. Eleanor watched with a mixture of emotions, joy at seeing Amelia finally reunited with her true parents, but also a pang of sadness and fear at the thought of losing the girl she had raised as her own. When the music ceased, the silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Amelia looked at her biological parents, then at Eleanor, and suddenly everything made sense. The pieces of her life's puzzle finally clicked into place. I remember," Amelia said softly, her voice trembling. "Not everything, but fragments. The music. You singing to me." Her biological parents nodded. unable to contain their tears. "We never stopped looking for you, darling," Victoria said, reaching out hesitantly. Amelia took her hand, feeling a warmth that felt both familiar and foreign. "Why?" Amelia asked, turning to Eleanor. The question hung in the air, laden with years of secrets and lies. Eleanor sighed deeply. I couldn't have children, and when I saw you so small and lovely, I just wanted to give you a good life. I know it was wrong, but at the time, you stole me," Amelia said, her voice a mixture of hurt and confusion. "Yes," Eleanor admitted, tears streaming down her face. "And there isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret the pain I caused, but I never regretted loving you, Amelia." The silence that followed was heavy. Amelia felt torn between the love for the woman who had raised her and the joy of finding her biological parents. It was as if her heart was being pulled in two opposite directions. "What happens now?" Amelia asked, looking at everyone in the room. Robert Harper cleared his throat. "Well, there are legal matters to be discussed. What Eleanor did was a crime." Amelia. "Kidnapping." Amelia felt a pang of fear. "Are you going to send her to prison?" Her parents exchanged glances. We don't know yet. There's a lot to discuss." "But what about me?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling. "Where will I live? With whom?" The tension in the room was palpable. All the adults seemed uncomfortable, no one wanting to be the first to address the delicate subject. "You're 17 now, Amelia," Victoria Harper said softly. "Legally, you're still a minor, but your opinion matters. We would love to have the chance to get to know you better, to be a family." Amelia felt a wave of panic wash over her. It was too much to process all at once. Her entire life, everything she thought she knew about herself, had been turned upside down in a matter of days. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Eleanor stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're Amelia, an incredible, talented and strong young woman. That will never change no matter what happens." Amelia nodded, grateful for the support, but still confused. "I need time," she said, looking at everyone in the room, "to process all of this, to figure out who I really am." Her biological parents exchanged understanding glances. "Of course, darling," Robert said. "We've waited 17 years to find you. We can wait a little longer for you to feel comfortable." In the days that followed, Amelia oscillated between moments of joy and profound confusion. She spent hours talking with her biological parents, uncovering a family history she never knew she had. At the same time, her relationship with Eleanor was strained, fraught with hurt and betrayal, but also with a deep love that couldn't be denied. Nights were the worst. Lying in bed, Amelia would wonder who she really was. Amelia Blackwood, raised by a loving but deceitful guardian, or Amelia Harper, the long-lost daughter finally found. The truth was she was both and neither all at once. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia began to find solace in music. She would spend hours at the piano, sometimes alone, sometimes with Robert. Music became her anchor, something familiar in a world that seemed to have lost all stability. A month after the initial meeting, all parties involved gathered again. Solicitors, social workers, her biological parents, and Eleanor. Amelia sat in the center, feeling the weight of the decisions that needed to be made. "We've given this a lot of thought," Robert Harper began. "And while what happened was terrible, we don't want to press for criminal charges." Eleanor let out a sigh of relief, tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. "But see," Victoria Harper continued, "we want to be a part of Amelia's life. We want the chance to be a family." Amelia looked at all the faces around her, people who loved her, each in their own way. "I want that too," she finally said. "I want to get to know you, my biological parents. But I can't just abandon the life I've had so far." After hours of discussion, an agreement was reached. Amelia would continue living with Eleanor until she turned 18, but she would spend holidays and weekends with her biological parents. Eleanor agreed to undergo therapy and counseling, and all the adults committed to putting Amelia's well-being first. That night, alone in her room, Amelia reflected on everything that had happened. Her life had changed drastically. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. She was still figuring out who she was, but now she had more people to support her on that journey. Sitting at the piano, Amelia began to play. The melody was new, an original composition that blended elements of the lullabies Eleanor used to sing and the music her biological parents had shared with her. It was a song of contradictions and harmonies, of loss and discovery, of pain and healing. It was Amelia's song, complex, beautiful, and entirely her own. The solicitor's office was quiet, the tension palpable. John Smith, the Harpers, Eleanor, and their respective solicitors sat around a large mahogany table. Amelia waited nervously outside. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead solicitor began, "we are here to finalize the agreement regarding Amelia Harper Smith's situation. Does everyone agree to the terms discussed?" There was a moment of hesitation before everyone nodded. John was the first to speak. "I agree to drop all charges against Eleanor, provided she cooperates fully with the transition process and continues with psychological counseling." Eleanor, her eyes brimming with tears, nodded. I'll do anything to ensure Amelia's well-being." Victoria Harper took a deep breath before speaking. "We agree to the shared custody arrangement. Amelia will spend half the time with us in Cornwall and half with Eleanor here in London, at least until she turns 18. "And what about Amelia's musical education?" Robert Harper asked. John leaned forward, his eyes shining with determination. "I propose using my influence and resources to ensure Amelia has access to the best musical opportunities possible. Private lessons, masterclasses, performances at prestigious venues, whatever it takes to nurture her extraordinary talent." The Harpers exchanged glances, clearly impressed with the offer. "That would be incredible," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "But how does Amelia feel about all of this?" As if on cue, the door opened and Amelia entered, her posture a mixture of nervousness and determination. "I heard everything," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And I want to try. I want to get to know my biological parents. I want to continue my music and—" She looked at Eleanor with tears in her eyes. "I want to keep Eleanor in my life too. She made mistakes, but she loved me and cared for me all these years." The solicitor smiled gently. "Well, it seems we have an agreement then. Let's finalize the paperwork." In the weeks that followed, Amelia's life transformed into a whirlwind of change and new experiences. She divided her time between London and Cornwall, getting to know her biological family and rediscovering her relationship with Eleanor. John, true to his word, organized a benefit concert at the Royal Albert Hall to showcase Amelia's talent to the world. The event would not only serve as a debut for the young prodigy, but also raise funds for organizations that supported missing children and their families. A month before the concert, Amelia found herself in the Harpers' music room in Cornwall, working on an original composition for the performance. Her fingers danced over the piano keys, weaving a complex melody that seemed to tell her story. Robert Harper watched, mesmerized. "It's incredible, darling. You've managed to capture so much emotion." Amelia smiled shyly. "I'm trying to incorporate elements from all parts of my life. See, this section here," she played a soft, melancholic passage, "represents my years with Eleanor, and this more vibrant part," her fingers flew across the keys in a burst of notes, "is about discovering my true identity and family." Victoria entered the room carrying a tray of tea and biscuits. "And how are you feeling about all of this, darling?" Amelia stopped playing, reflecting for a moment. "It's complicated. Sometimes I still feel divided, like I'm living two different lives. But the music helps me bring it all together." The rehearsals for the concert were intense and emotional. Amelia worked tirelessly, perfecting every note of her original composition. John often watched, his chest swelling with pride as he witnessed his granddaughter's talent blossom. A week before the big day, during a particularly challenging rehearsal, Amelia suddenly stopped playing, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if I can do this," she sobbed. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I disappoint everyone?" Eleanor, who was present that day, rushed to Amelia's side, embracing her tightly. "Oh, my darling, you could never disappoint us. You've overcome so much, shown such strength." John joined them, placing a gentle hand on Amelia's shoulder. Remember, my dear, it's not about being perfect. It's about telling your story, sharing your journey through the music. Amelia nodded, wiping away her tears. Taking a deep breath, she returned to the piano, her hands finding the keys with renewed determination. As the day of the concert drew closer, the remaining tensions between the two families began to dissipate. The Harpers and Eleanor, initially wary of each other, found common ground in their love for Amelia. John Mouse, in turn, made a point of including everyone in the preparations, ensuring that each person who played a significant role in Amelia's life had a part to play. On the eve of the concert, the entire extended family gathered for dinner at John's penthouse apartment. The atmosphere was a mix of nervous anticipation and excitement. "A toast," John said, raising his glass, "to Amelia, whose music and courage have brought us all together." Everyone raised their glasses, smiles on their faces. Amelia looked around the table, her heart overflowing with emotion. There were her biological parents, Eleanor, her grandfather John, her uncle David, all the pieces of her puzzle finally fitting together. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up on me, for giving me the chance to have all parts of my family in my life." That night, after everyone had retired, Amelia found herself alone in the music room. She sat at the piano, her fingers gently caressing the keys. She began to play, not her composition for the concert, but a new melody that seemed to flow spontaneously from her fingertips. It was a song of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of new beginnings. As she played, Amelia felt as if each note was healing a part of her wounded soul, filling the empty spaces left by years of secrets and separation. When the last note faded into the air, Amelia knew she was ready for the concert. Yes, but more than that, ready to fully embrace who she was with all the complexities and contradictions of her story. Tomorrow she would step onto the stage of the Royal Albert Hall, not just as Amelia Harper Smith, the young prodigy, but as a synthesis of all her experiences. The girl raised by Eleanor, the long-lost daughter of the Harpers, the granddaughter of John Smith. And through her music, she would tell her story, a story of loss and discovery, of pain and healing, of family and identity. A story that, she hoped, would touch hearts and perhaps help other separated families find their way back to each other. With a serene smile, Amelia closed the lid of the piano and headed to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, the start of a new chapter in her life, and she couldn't wait to see what melodies the future would bring. The Royal Albert Hall glittered under the lights of the London night. A year had passed since the revelations that forever changed the lives of Amelia, formerly known as Lily, and everyone around her. Now the prestigious venue was packed for the benefit concert organized by John Smith. Backstage, Amelia adjusted her concert gown, her hands trembling slightly. John approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Ready, my dear?" he asked gently. Amelia took a deep breath, nodding. "Yes, Grandpa, I'm ready." In the front row of the audience, the Harpers, Robert and Victoria, sat beside David, Amelia's uncle. Not far away, Eleanor, the woman who had raised Amelia, sat under the discreet supervision of a social worker. Her eyes shone with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The lights dimmed and an expectant hush fell over the auditorium. John Smith walked onto the stage, his imposing figure immediately capturing everyone's attention. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the hall. "A year ago, a series of extraordinary events led us to uncover a long-buried truth and reunite a separated family. Today, we celebrate not only the incredible talent of my granddaughter, Amelia, but also the power of music to heal, unite, and inspire." John paused, his eyes sweeping across the audience. "It is with great pride that I announce the establishment of the Smith Foundation for Missing Children. This organization will be dedicated to reuniting separated families and offering support to those affected by such tragedies." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience, followed by warm applause. "And now," John continued, a proud smile on his face, "I have the honor of presenting my granddaughter, Amelia Harper Smith." Amelia walked onto the stage, her graceful posture masking the nervousness she felt inside. She sat at the grand piano, closed her eyes for a moment, and then began to play. The opening notes of her original composition filled the air, soft and hesitant, like the first tentative steps of a child. Gradually, the melody gained confidence and complexity. The listeners could sense Amelia's journey through the music, moments of confusion and fear giving way to discovery and joy. In the audience, Eleanor wept silently, recognizing strains of the lullaby she used to sing to Lily when she was a baby. The harpers held hands tightly, tears in their eyes as they heard echoes of the melodies they had shared with Amelia over the past year. The piece reached its climax in a burst of vibrant, hopeful notes, representing the moment when all the disparate parts of Amelia's life finally came together. Her hands danced over the keys with confidence and passion, her music telling a story of loss, discovery, and above all, love. When the last note resonated through the hall, there was a moment of stunned silence before the audience erupted in thunderous applause. Amelia stood, tears of joy streaming down her face, and took a bow. John joined her on stage, embracing his granddaughter with pride. Soon they were joined by the harpers, David, and, to the surprise of many, Eleanor. The image of the reunited family, so diverse and once fractured, now united by love and music, brought tears to the eyes of many in the audience. After the concert, as guests mingled in the foyer, John stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. He stood at the entrance of the Royal Albert Hall, watching the bustling London streets. It was then that he noticed a small figure on the pavement, a young girl, not much younger than Amelia had been when he first met her, selling flowers. For a moment, John was transported back to that fateful night, when a simple act of compassion had set in motion a chain of events that would transform so many lives. With a gentle smile, he approached the girl. "Good evening, Poppet. May I buy all your flowers?" The girl's eyes widened in surprise and delight. As John took the bouquet, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning, he saw Amelia standing beside him, a knowing smile on her face. "To remember where it all began?" she asked softly. John nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And to celebrate new beginnings." Together, grandfather and granddaughter returned to the foyer of the Royal Albert Hall, where their families, all parts of them, were waiting. The flowers were distributed amongst them, a tangible symbol of the beauty that can blossom even in the most unexpected circumstances. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Amelia made one final request. "May I play one more piece?" Everyone readily agreed, following her back to the concert hall. Amelia sat once more at the piano, her hands hovering over the keys. She played a single note, clear and resonant, letting it hang in the air. That single note held within it the promise of all the music yet to be written, all the stories yet to be told, all the love yet to be discovered. As the note slowly faded, Amelia looked at her assembled family, John, the Harpers, David, Eleanor, and smiled. It was the end of one chapter, yes, but also the beginning of a new symphony in their lives. And so, with that single note of hope echoing in their hearts, they left the Royal Albert Hall and stepped out into the London night, ready to face whatever melodies the future might bring.